I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: what does Jordan Hunt's roundhouse kick reveal about pro-abortion activists? Now, I'm sure most of you have heard about this by now, but a guy called Jordan Hunt roundhouse kicked in the face a female simply because she was out expressing her right to freedom of speech over the issue of abortion. And she's pro-life, so she holds a different view to his on this issue of abortion. And he asks her a question, and then he very quickly roundhouse kicks her in the face. Let's watch the video footage now so you can get the context, because this footage I think is worth watching and worth exploring, because actually there's some consistent trends here that you see with pro-abortion activists time and time again in these types of scenarios where there is engagement with people who are pro-life. So let's watch the footage now together.
They actually have people filming you the whole time, which is why I say kill with kindness.
Guess what? Hey,
Destruction of private property. It's against the law.
Somebody gets raped by somebody and they're like, I'm a 16-year-old and I can't have this baby. Think you should keep it?
It's a baby.
Yeah.
If someone is raped and she gave birth and she decided to kill her 3-year-old child.
I meant to get your phone.
Someone call the cops.
Meant to take your phone.
Do not touch me. Someone call the cops.
So what does this footage reveal? Well, first of all, you'll notice a couple of things here. Number one, he starts with the extreme case. And this is very, very common from people who are pro-choice activists. They don't start with what the sort of foundational moral truths are. Instead, they go to the extreme fringes, and then they try and apply the extreme fringes to the general norm and say, well, because of this happening in the extreme fringe, thus this must mean that the general norm should be X, Y, and Z on the issue of abortion. That is not how you make good law, and it is definitely not how you do good moral philosophy. You don't start with the hard cases and then work your way back in and decide a moral norm that way. What you do is you start with the moral norm and then you work your way out to the fringes and you ask the question, how would the moral norm apply in these hard cases? As they say, hard cases make for bad law. But this is a very, very common tactic. So he goes to the extreme straight away. But here's the interesting thing. She starts to give an answer. But what do we notice? He's not listening. Again, this is a very common trait that I've encountered from people who are pro-choice activists. They are not interested in genuine dialogue. He's not listening to her. He's just standing there doing this. He wants her to buy into his straw man argument that he's trying to set up here, but she won't. She's trying to actually give her position, but he's not listening to her. Thirdly, he then doesn't let her finish. He reacts before she has even finished explaining her position. Again, this is very, very common. This is something I've encountered time and time again from people who are pro-choice activists. They're not really interested in dialogue. They're not really interested in listening because they're not actually interested in hearing people present their side of this issue if they hold a pro-life view. They very rarely will let people complete what they're saying, or if a person is allowed to actually have their say on this issue, they will effectively, very commonly, they will ignore what has been said and then they will jump to a completely different topic. They never actually maintain a sort of cogent and consistent string of logic in their examination of this issue. Now, of course, point number 4 is that he resorts to violence. Now, to be fair, most pro-choice activists don't physically attack other people. It does happen. No side has the monopoly on crazy. We see this. It's just sort of one of the failings of human nature. And some people seem less able to control their emotions than others. And when their emotions get the better of them, they lash out physically. And this is just an example of that. So thankfully, most pro-choice activists, to be fair to them, don't resort to physical violence. But here's the interesting thing. As soon as he has roundhouse kicked her in the face, he then tries to defend his position by saying, and what he's just done, by saying, well, I didn't mean to kick you, I was trying to kick your phone. That doesn't matter, that doesn't mean a thing. The fact that you're willing to do physical violence to her property is not a good and moral position to adopt either. Both of those things is wrong, whether you're trying to kick her in the face or whether you're trying to kick her phone and damage her personal property. Now, interestingly, this is not an uncommon thing for pro-choice activists. You see this time and time again. I have lost count of the number of times I have seen, for example, pro-life billboards that are actively defaced by people who are pro-choice activists. They don't engage, they don't dialogue on the issue, but they are willing to destroy property, even if they don't resort normally, like this guy has, to physical violence against people who are expressing pro-life views. Now, the interesting thing is here, he's okay with this idea that he would do damage to her physical property. It speaks to a serious weakness and inability to engage in rational dialogue. Not only that, but it speaks to the fact that possibly he and other pro-choice activists like him who are willing to do this damage to public property or to people's private property is the fact that they don't really have a sound logical position to put forward, and in that situation they're so scared of the pro-life position that they're willing to do things that are completely irrational and immoral, like destroying property, because they just don't want to have to actually examine and deal with the logical moral arguments that are being put forward. And lastly, you'll notice, of course, here that he's trying to pass himself off as being pro-choice and pro-woman. But here's the thing, his actions clearly disprove that claim. Now, this whole thing of not really being pro-choice is very common amongst pro-choice activists. Their position generally tends to be one more of pro-abortion. It's not actually about allowing people the choice to express opposing views on this issue. Not only that, but they don't allow people who are medical professionals to express their choice when it comes to saying, well, I choose not to participate. There is a really strong movement now within pro-choice activist circles to try and deny the right to freedom of conscience to medical professionals around abortion. That is not a pro-choice position to adopt at all. So his behaviour here is very common. The other idea that he's trying to present here is that he's pro-woman. But again, I would argue that pro-choice activists are very selective in their application of being pro-woman. So, for example, one of the common ways in which we see this manifest now is the fact that whenever a female steps forward and dares to suggest that abortion did psychological damage to her, so she had an abortion and it hurt her psychologically, the pro-choice activist response to that normally now is to say that there is no such thing as psychological harm after abortion. And what they're doing when they make that false claim is they are accusing that female of either being delusional, so she's mentally unstable, or she's telling lies. That's the only two other alternatives there, right? That she's delusional, she's mistaken, it's not real, it's some sort of fantasy or some sort of falsehood that she believes about the world, or she's deliberately lying. She's actively telling lies about the harm that abortion has done to her. That is not a pro-woman position to adopt, but it is common amongst the pro-choice activist movement. So for me, although it is surprising to see a guy lash out with physical violence against a female and then try and maintain some pro-woman position, it's not unsurprising to me that this anti-female position that does manifest itself regularly in pro-choice activism would bubble over in certain people who are not quite as stable as others in this kind of way. And by the way, this is not uncommon for him. He's done this before himself. We've got previous footage of him in another scenario where he is stealing signs off a pro-lifer and running off with them. What kicked off this whole incident was apparently he turned up with a vivid marker and started defacing the signs that these pro-lifers were holding. And that's when they started to film him. And then after that, he resorts to this act of physical violence. As I said, some of these things I've pointed out are not uncommon. This unwillingness to actually engage in honest and robust and civil dialogue about this issue, I get it. It's highly personal and it's highly politicised, and there's a lot of pain often tied up within this issue. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't actually explore the big ethical question, because there's a lot at stake here. There is a lot at stake here. If pro-lifers like me are right and we're telling the truth, then we've got a really serious problem on our hands as a human race, because abortion has now killed more innocent human beings than anything else that we've ever deliberately done to ourselves. So that's an issue that demands a very serious and honest and robust examination of the moral questions involved. It's not good enough to respond with violence. It's not good enough to try and shut down debate, especially not if we're claiming to be a humane and compassionate and intelligent society. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.